There's this saying, a cluttered life is a cluttered mind. So just your general surroundings, do you have a lot of unfinished jobs and just paperwork all over the table and rubbish on the floor? Or, have you kind of managed to make a clean, tidy, simplified environment? Because just with so many stresses and things you could think about, I think minimalising and sort of stripping it back just kind of simplifies life. Life's complicated and we don't need any more extra complications. So one thing for the sort of overthinker that I'd recommend personally, if you're not doing it already, that is just thinking of ways to maybe just get rid of the clutter. And if you do like things around you, ornaments and artwork and the rest of it, that's fine, that's cool. But even then, try and manage it and make it something that just doesn't overstimulate your mind. I think you need to just reduce things back and minimalise, and I think that will just help day to day. And I think as well, if you just know where everything is, like if you've got things in drawers and you know where it is, if all your paperwork is done and it's filed away in cabinets and everything has its place and you know where the place is, then you just can then enact more control over your life, and then it's just one less thing to think about, because life is hard enough as it is, and you just don't want to have to come home from a hard day and just think, I've just got all this shit, I don't know where anything is, and it's just one extra thing to worry about. And for someone that potentially worries quite a lot, like one extra worry could be the difference between going on like a big bender spiral depression for like 3 weeks and not. So yeah, just this idea of tidying up your environment and just tidying up your life as well. Maybe a bit controversial, but are the people in your life helping you? Are they working with you? It sounds a bit cliche, but there's this idea of toxic friendships, toxic relationships, and maybe you can't avoid it. If they're your family members or that's your boss, what could you do? But you could do something. You could potentially at some point find another job. I don't think most bosses are arseholes. They might be in some jobs and in some places, and you might even go from one shit job with a shit boss straight to another and just come to the conclusion that all managers and bosses and the rest of it are against you or whatever. But they're not. I don't think they are. I think maybe you just had a bad run of it. And I'm not saying do this today or tomorrow or even next year, but in the back of your mind, maybe think about this idea of eventually getting away from this thing that stresses you out, that shouldn't stress you out, that doesn't need to be there. And I think if you really are the sort of person that gets easily overwhelmed and stressed and you overthink about a lot, you might even be someone that's sort of doing or trying to do this already by, working for yourself, being self-employed, freelancing and all that kind of stuff. But if you're not, then that's maybe something to consider, or just finding work that isn't like that. And I think when it comes to family, do you have to see your family all the time if they just always argue and they're always negative and you always have these sort of same problems that, basically stress you out and make you anxious? At the end of the day, you can't control how they're going to enact towards you, but you can control what you physically do about it, so you can afford just not to be there. And there's this idea that, you try and reconcile your relationships. If you've got a bad relationship with your mum or your dad, maybe you need to just speak to them about it. I hear that advice quite a lot, and I just think, okay, you've obviously not had anyone in your family who is just stubborn, basically. Because you get some people that are so stubborn that they will die for their ideas, even if their ideas are completely wrong and bad. They would just want to maintain this ego, this sense of being right, and there's nothing you can do. You can't say, you know what, Mum, that time that you were, really strict with me as a kid, and you didn't care about me and you weren't nurturing, and all that kind of childhood trauma that I've developed over the years because of the way you parented in a bad way. And I appreciate maybe you were stressed and all this stuff, but I just want to let you know about that. It's going to be very rare that, if you've got somewhat of a neglectful mother, that she's going to suddenly be like, oh yeah, sorry about it. I didn't realise I was I was doing all this stuff. Oh, let me completely change the person I am and apologise and the rest of it. people aren't going to change. And you can have the talk, you know, it takes a lot of courage, I suppose, to have the talk, you know, if you need to say what you need to say, and you know, it can be quite difficult to face that conflict and confrontation. But yeah, if you can do it, if it works, great. If it doesn't, okay. You know, you can't necessarily expect a good result, even if you put in the effort to try and, you know, cultivate that good result. So sometimes with, you know, these destructive family relationships, I think it might be a good idea just to back off as much as you can and just put your hands up and say, I would love a relationship with my dad, for example, but he's too stubborn, he's too set in his ways. There's no way I could ever change his worldview and make him come round to things and, you know, us have a good relationship. And it's sad, and I know what it would be like to have things like that if that's a problem, but you're just going to have to accept that that's how things are, I suppose, and all you can do is sort of get used to that and just therefore put measures in place so that you don't feel like you've got to keep spending time with your, you know, say parents. I mean, if you live with your parents, it's quite difficult, but at some point, getting away in that case would be good. Moving out at all costs would be a good thing, just in order to have more control over your life and not to have to deal with those kind of conflicts. So you've got the issue of trying to control your environment, trying to control your friends, again, relationships. If you've got a toxic partner, if you've got someone who doesn't really have your best interests at heart and is making life difficult, you know, do you need that? Because this is something I had to do. I had to sort of strip away some of my friends, some of my relationships with partners. It was difficult because I didn't have a lot of friends as it was. I didn't, you know, I kind of have a lot of insecurities and anxieties and fears, being the sort of person that does overthink a lot. So, you know, it was a big decision to sort of kick certain people out of my life, so to speak. And they weren't necessarily all bad, these people, but I could tell that we were in a certain sort of state of relationship where things were never going to change, things were never going to get better. Like I said earlier, sometimes you want to have the talk and resolve all the issues, but it was never going to work. So, I mean, I had to go away and I had to make some tough decisions to either break up, or I ended up just staying in relationships which in the end girls would break up with me because they thought that there was a problem, which there was, and I was maybe too scared to do the breakup and initiate that myself, and that wasn't great. But in the end, it all kind of worked out. And I feel like it's only now, actually, because of having gone through the whole having friends and then kind of having to let them go, and then having relationships and having to let them go or them let me go, and then finding new friends or new relationship, like a new relationship that I'm in now, that I'm able to actually talk about this and advise about it. Because it's so difficult when, you know, you might read about it in a book and someone might say, oh yeah, you know, you got to do this, you got to do that, but it's only once you experience the thing that you kind of realise, actually, yeah, it does make sense. So anyway, yeah, there's just a couple of ways there of just simplifying your life, whether it's with relationships or your environment, and just that in itself can then have like a massive impact on how you're thinking about things in the world. So yeah, make of that what you will, and hopefully I'll see you again in the next one.